Well, Dr. Biden, the first presidential debate is less than a month away, and we've debated at this table. There have been people that have thought President Biden shouldn't even debate President Trump just due to the fact that Donald Trump will gaslight, he overtalks, there are no guardrails. So,
he stalks.
I happen to believe it's really important, more than ever, to have a debate with guardrails. What is the strategy that the president has going into this? Any tips you'd have for a debate that we could pull off where we could actually hear our candidates?
They've built that in where they're going to turn off those mics so that somebody can't ramble or scream at somebody. Not that my husband would be the one doing that. And so that's already been negotiated. And, I think the American people deserve a debate because you need to see your choices. You need to see Trump, and you need to see the president, and you need to see the differences. And my husband's, and you're going to see how smart he is and the experience he has. And then you'll see somebody who, like you're saying, I'm going to use Joy's words, can't put a sentence together, and everything is beautiful, and it's wonderful.
Tremendous.
Big league. Tremendous.
Yeah. Meanwhile,
promised we'd start to reconnect black and brown and overlooked neighborhoods cut off by highways in the 60s. And decades of disinvestment as a consequence of it, including here in Philly. Well, we're changed that with the Recovery Act. Right now, you see all the construction going on the highways around here.
All right, guys, so we got to talk about the cackling hens on The View. Yeah, I know. The cackling hens on The View. Yeah, I know. Okay, I get it. I don't like looking at the cackling hens either or listening to them talk, okay? But this video is not necessarily about the cackling hens themselves. More so it's about their guests, okay? And the fact that they had a couple of unhinged guests today. The first one being John Grisham, who is a former Democrat lawmaker, and Jill Biden. Now, we're going to talk about Jill Biden later because the things that she's saying is important to address because what she's saying is basically an idea of how Democrats are going to campaign. And Democrats are essentially trying to campaign based off spreading misinformation and making promises that they know they can't keep, right? Because the job of Democrats is to get ignorant people to vote for them. So I'm going to address what Jill Biden said. First, I want to address John Grisham, who openly fantasized about assassinating conservative Supreme Court justices because the liberals are upset that the courts are not allowing them to get their way. Take a look.
Imitating life, really, I think, is what you're doing. But life right now in the courtroom is getting a little scary. I mean, let's take the Supreme Court right now. A lot of people have issues with them. There's some scandals plaguing the Supreme Court. Do you have any thoughts on that? And maybe write a book or make a movie out of that?
I wrote a great book called The Pelican Brief.
Yes. Whoa, you sure did.
In which 2 Supreme Court justices were assassinated.
I know.
Yes.
And I thought about doing it again. And
no.
Writing part 2. He's talking about writing part 2.
It's all fiction.
It's all fiction.
It's all fiction.
It's all fiction.
Don't get upset.
It's just fiction. It's made up stories.
The court has never looked this bad.
No.
In my lifetime, some of the rulings, the ethical challenges, it went downhill in 2000 when 5 Republicans on the court chose to elect a president.
Oh, yes.
That was the most political, Bush versus Gore.
Yeah.
And that's when it all started really going downhill.
I agree with you.
Yeah, so what you have here is a Democrat openly fantasizing about assassinating Supreme Court justice. Now, I know some people may say, oh, well, he's just joking. It's fiction. This is what the cackling hens tried to say when the audience essentially cheered on this guy fantasizing about assassinating Supreme Court justice or writing about doing so in a book, which I think is a very weird thing, okay? I understand, maybe you're writing this book, okay? Maybe you're writing a book as a way to express what you want to do without actually really doing it. But when you go as far as to openly fantasize about doing it again because you find some type of pleasure in this idea of Supreme Court justice being assassinated, again, that's a very weird thing, okay? I think that the FBI should watch this episode of The View and show up to this guy's doorstep, start asking some questions, okay? I'm so serious. Because if this man was a Trump supporter, let's say he said this on Fox News or some other right-wing outlet, Do you think that the mainstream liberal media will be giving this guy the benefit of the doubt? Absolutely not. Okay. Can you imagine if Trump or, some Republican openly fantasized about taking over the Capitol again, right? Say, hey, well, I wrote about it in a book. I'm openly fantasizing about doing it again, but hey, it's just fiction. It's just fiction. I'm just writing about it, right? I'm just writing about it. Again, do you think that person, whether that be Trump or Republican or conservative, do you think they would get the same benefit of the doubt? No, they wouldn't. But again, when Democrats openly fantasize and write about committing acts of violence against people that they disagree with politically, oh, well, it's just a joke. Oh, it's just fiction. Calm down, guys, right? This is what they do. Again, it's just absolutely amazing how that works, considering how we did have an attempted assassination on a Supreme Court justice. That actually happened. So it's a very serious topic. It's a very serious subject. While you have the mainstream liberal media trying to make up scandals against the Supreme Court. I mean, I've talked about this in detail, okay? They're trying to go after Samuel Alito, demanding that he resign, demanding that he step down from the January 6th cases because they've magically connected back some upside down American flag and an appeal to heaven flag to support for January 6th. Again, the connection is non-existent. It's not really there. They're just making stuff up. But yet, they're trying to use this as an excuse to demand that Samuel Alito step down and trying to say, well, the Supreme Court is wrapped in scandals and controversy. No, they're not. There's nothing controversial about the Supreme Court except that they're not allowing Democrats to get their way, right? So again, they're desperate. They're trying to undermine the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court is the only institution stopping them from overthrowing our republic, okay? So again, Democrats know that this election is super important, not just because of who the president of the United States is, but because it is likely that if Trump wins, that Samuel Alito, he's going to retire, Clarence Thomas is going to retire, and he's going to appoint 2 young justices to the court, maybe one of them being Eileen Cannon, right? That will really piss these people off, right? He's going to appoint 2 young justices to the court, and the court will basically be conservative for the next 30, 40, 50 years, okay? Which is a nightmare for these people, right? It is a nightmare. And again, this is why it's so important to vote, okay? To vote against Democrats because they have a plan to overthrow the Supreme Court, okay? And you guys have seen how important the federal courts and the Supreme Court have been when it comes to stopping Democrats from overthrowing our republic. So it is important that we do everything that we can to protect that institution. So when you go out to vote, you're not just voting for Trump and his policies, you're also voting when it comes to the Supreme Court, right? That's what you're voting for. You're voting for the future of the Supreme Court. So without further ado, I want to react to the nonsense that is being spewed here from Jill Biden on The View.
So we are going to meet people where they are. We're going to go to college campuses. We're going to go to just every state that we can get into. I've been traveling every single day. Joe has been traveling as much as possible. And we're not going to take anything for granted. And those polls are going to turn, I'm confident of it, because as time goes on and as people start to focus a little bit more about what's at stake and start to become educated on the issues and the differences between the two men, I believe that Americans are going to choose good over evil.
Yeah, so this is how you know they have nothing, right? When they start talking about, well, it's good versus evil, that basically means that, well, we don't have any policies that could change anything. We're not going to rely on, the economy or, closing the border or, doing anything to actually make the country better, right? We're not going to do that. We're going to essentially try to make an emotional argument. We're going to appeal to people's emotions and say, well, Trump is evil, right? And Biden is good, okay? And, it's a very sophomoric thing to do, but this is where Democrats are at, right? These are the type of arguments they have to use because their base are people that are very emotional, okay? This is why we have so much political violence in this country, thanks to far leftists, because they're overly emotional, right? So again, this is why Jill Biden is trying to appeal to emotion and not appeal to logical reason, because if they appeal to logical reason or results, then they know that the choice is clearly not Biden, right? The choice is clear and it ain't Biden, okay? This is why they stick with, well, Trump evil, right? Because they have nothing else, okay? They have nothing else.
Dr. Biden, women are likely to play a crucial role in this in November. And we've heard Trump bragging about stripping women's reproductive rights. 14 states have a total ban on abortion, and now IVF is under attack.
Yes.
How dangerous?
IVF is not under attack. Okay, I mean, again, this is the type of stuff that you see in mainstream liberal media. They just lie. Everybody saw what Republicans did after the Alabama Supreme Court ruling on IVF. They instantly moved to protect it, okay? And Republicans in the House have come out in support of it. Republicans overwhelmingly are in support of protecting access to IVF, right? So again, this talking point from the liberal media that IVF is under attack is nonsense, okay? This is the type of stuff they're putting out here. They have essentially started to rely on just lies in order for them to push their agenda.
Dangerous a time is this for women, and how much worse could it get in a second or third, as you mentioned, Trump presidency?
Well, it could get a lot worse under a Trump presidency. I mean, you have to believe him when he uses words like dictator, bloodbath, third term, violence. We've seen it. So when he says these words, believe him. Don't think this isn't going to happen.
Again, just listen to this. Just listen to this nonsense. You have to believe Trump when he uses words like bloodbath, dictator, third term, violence. Well, I'm pretty sure Biden and plenty of Democrats have used those terms throughout their careers. Okay, notice how she left the context out of how Trump used those words and terms. Well, she did that on purpose, okay? She did that because context is not important for these people, right? They have taken Trump out of context so much, and they're basically trying to say, well, if Trump says anything that we feel can be interpreted in a way that can be weaponized against him to try to make it seem like he's some bloodthirsty dictator, then we're going to do that. It doesn't matter what the actual context is, okay? And it's silly. It's just as silly as when Democrats use the term bloodbath to describe the economy, right? When a Republican is in office or whatever, it's just as silly as trying to accuse the Democrats of, you know, some sort of call to violence, right? It's a very silly thing to do, but this is what they're doing to Trump, right? Again, she purposely just left out the context of what he said. She just said, well, when he uses these words, these trigger words, right? These dog whistles, right? But they're not dog whistles to anybody except Democrat propagandists, right? That are trying to take everything that he says out of context and spin it into something that is not, right? So, you know, again, this is a part of the desperation from the Democrats to pretend like they are for women's rights when they're not, okay? I did a story about Amber Rose coming out and saying, hey, I can't support this guy Biden. He's against women's rights because he supports biological men being in women's spaces, okay? So even somebody like her who's very pro-abortion, sexual liberation and all this other stuff, right? Feminism. Even somebody like her can see the threat that the Democrats and Joe Biden represent to women's rights. If you talk about women's rights are on the ballot, but it's not on the ballot in the way that the Democrats are trying to say is on the ballot, right? Because abortion is not really on the ballot, and I'm going to explain more about that later. But what is on the ballot is women's rights in sports, is women's rights when it comes to having their own spaces and their right to privacy away from biological men. So again, women's rights is definitely on the ballot, just not in the way that these people are presenting.
That's right. Yeah.
And women's rights, absolutely women's rights and IVF. I mean, we have to have a choice. And Joe wants to codify Roe.
Yeah,
and we have to. We have to fight hard. So
again, this is the trick from Democrats. They're not going to codify Roe v. Wade into law. It's not going to happen. First and foremost, even if they had the 60 senators to do it, which they're not going to get 60 senators to do it unless Democrats try to basically move to get rid of the filibuster. Now, if they do that, again, all hell will break loose in Congress. But let's say they try to do that or they get 60 senators, which won't happen, in order to codify Roe v. Wade into law. It's not going to be able to overcome a challenge to the Supreme Court. It's just not going to happen. And the reason why is because abortion is not a federally constitutional right. It's just not, okay? And Congress has very specific powers that are enumerated to them, things that they can do. And that does not include making abortion legal in every state, because lawmaking at the basic level is a state's issue, right? This is the job of the states to make these type of laws, okay? And the broadest power that Congress has to potentially regulate abortion is the Commerce Clause. However, they've already shown that no, we're just not okay with Congress or the federal government overreaching, using the Commerce Clause, and that probably would be the best argument that the left would have for trying to codify Roe v. Wade into law and why it would be constitutional and why Congress can regulate it. But this Supreme Court, they've shown that they're probably not going to go for that, right? So it's going to get shot down by a conservative Supreme Court. It's not happening. And for that same exact reasoning, this is why Republicans shouldn't be playing up the national ban, because for that same reasoning, you probably can't do it the other way around as well, too. Okay, abortion is a state's issue, which is what it should be. And if you love your abortions, you want to keep your abortions, hey, you have the option to do that in your state. And if you hate abortion, if you want to ban abortion, you got the option to do that in your state. But it is not a federal issue. It's just not. And Democrats and Republicans need to let it go. I'm so serious, right? It is an issue that we're voting on at the federal level, and it's just not a federal issue anymore. It's a state's issue, okay? So again, Democrats are lying, right? When they come and say, we're going to codify Roe v. Wade into law. It's very unlikely that that's going to happen. And if it does happen, it's going to get shot down. So they're lying, right? And again, this is why both parties should stop campaigning on this issue at the federal level. But again, what Democrats are trying to do is that they're trying to appeal to stupid people, right? To people who don't know this, who don't understand how anything works, and they just believe that, well, Democrats can just do whatever they want, right? They can pass whatever law they want to pass. And that's just not true. It's not true. Roe v. Wade cannot and will not be codified into law. And if you're voting because you want to codify Roe v. Wade into law only, then you probably shouldn't vote, okay? Because you're essentially throwing away your vote. I'm so serious.
We get it back because, Joy, you and I remember when Roe came the law, and we kept thinking, oh, this won't be taken away, but we cannot take things for granted because they can. And think of the Supreme Court. For God's sake, talk about things getting worse. Can you imagine if we put any more Republicans on the Supreme Court? No. We will lose all of our rights. So we're talking about women's rights, gay rights. I mean, we will lose our rights and freedom. Voting rights. Yes,
all of this is up at stake.
Yeah, so you can see the desperation, okay? They're saying voting rights are at stake, women's rights are at stake, LGBTQ rights are at stake. Again, this is what they do, right? The fear-mongering is insane, but you notice what they didn't mention? They didn't mention the border, they didn't mention the economy. Well, why they didn't mention those things? Because they know that that's what this election really is about. And if you make this election about the economy, if you make it about the border, they're going to lose every single time. But if you make it about a whole bunch of other emotional issues, then, hey, they have a shot. Again, this is why they don't want to talk about the border. This is why they don't want to talk about the economy. But this is also why Republicans need to make this election about nothing else except the economy and the border, right? This is what they should be doing. This election is not about abortion. It's not about LGBTQ. It's not about Israel. It's not about Ukraine. It's about the economy. It's about the border. It's about crime. It's about the American people, okay? And the fact that Biden has destroyed our country with his economic policies, his progressive open border policies, and progressive soft on crime policies, thanks to the Democrats that are running these liberal cities. If Republicans make the election about the economy, the border, and crime, they will win in a landslide. But if they try to make it about anything else outside of that, that is where they will find themselves in uncomfortable territory, and they will be playing the game that Democrats want them to play. They will be talking about the issues that Democrats want them to talk about, and that is essentially the Democrats' only hope of winning, right? Is if Republicans go along with their little emotional game of talking about a bunch of things that quite honestly really don't matter to the American people. So again, Republicans need to avoid having conversations about that. Focus on crime, focus on the border, focus on the economy, and it's a landslide victory. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.